a lot of women don't look at their periods as that really great, wonderful time of the month. When we start to transition it into this space of like, that's when your $1 million ideas come in. That's when your most intuitive things come in. But you have to create the space to allow that to happen. So a lot of women just going through life and going through the day and just hustling to the next thing are missing out on those really intuitive things because they're not listening to them. So it really does require that intentionality to create the space to hear it.
Welcome to the Crown Yourself podcast, where together we build your empire and transform your subconscious stories about what's possible for your business, body, and life. I'm your host, Kimberly Spencer, founder of crownyourself.com, and I'm a master mindset coach, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, known to my clients as a game changer. Each week, you get the conscious leadership strategies you need to help you reign with courage, clarity, and confidence so that you too can make the income and impact you deserve. Imagine this podcast as your royal invitation to step into your full potential and reign in your divine purpose. Your sovereignty starts here, and your reign is now.
Hey, Renae.
Hey, how are you?
I am doing extraordinary. When you think of your cycle and these visionary or creative spurts, do they come in more one part of your cycle than into others?
Yes, they do, actually, honestly. So your visionary, like creative part of you happens when your hormones and brain are functioning one way. And then other times of the month, it's like more on integration and more on reflection and things like that. So like how your hormones function throughout the month do drastically change literally there's studies coming out now, like MRI studies of how our brain changes throughout the month. And so certain parts of our brain are lit up at different times than other times based on where our hormones are throughout the entire month, we are very different day to day to day. Like there's not a single day in a 30-day window or like a 20, if we want to say monthly rhythm, that women are exactly the same. Like our hormones are gradually increasing, gradually declining every single day. And all of that shift and change does impact the way we think. It impacts the way we create. It impacts the way we communicate. It impacts the way we self-reflect, how many limiting beliefs we feel like we have, how much self-doubt we have, like literally everything changes throughout the month. And so those rhythms, like where you sometimes want to burn down your business and you don't want to do it anymore, or the times where you feel like I am amazing AF, like I've got this, like those shifts and changes aren't necessarily you or something wrong with you. You're like, why did a week or so ago I felt like I was on top of the world and I was going to crush everything, and now I feel like everything's falling apart and I don't want to do it anymore. Like that shift and change isn't something wrong with you. It's just like the rhythm of how your hormones go. And when you know what that rhythm is, then they don't blindside you anymore.
150%. That was a big awakening last year. Like I've always kind of followed my hormones, but last year, because we had a lot of transition and we're coming off of a lot of death and grief and losing family members and moving twice in 1 year, I went to the doctor and I got my hormones tested and he's like, you don't have any. And I was like, well, that's not true.
Yeah.
Because there is a cycle, but my cortisol was so off the charts. He said, no wonder you felt like you wanted to burn your business to the ground. Like, no wonder, because my cortisol was just stuck on high. Yeah. And it wasn't impacting my menstrual cycle, but it was definitely impacting my mental cycle.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, because you coach through the cycle, the female cycle, and honoring the body. Mm-hmm. As the body changes during like seasons of trauma or grief or even pregnancy, how do the hormones and the ways that you regulate and navigate your business in that time correlate?
Yeah. Well, I think it really comes back to, like I talk about, like I used to be teaching menstrual cycle or like cycle syncing stuff all wrong, because in the past, I feel like it was very much focused on just the hormones. Like I come from a medical background. So it's like focus on the body, the biology, like what's actually happening. How is it impacting our brains? How is it impacting like the cortisol, like you talked about, like how is that cortisol cascade impacting all the other hormones? And that was kind of the lens in which I started my business and really focused in the beginning. And now I've moved into this place of like, I really feel like my core purpose and my core purpose in life is to help women learn to trust themselves. And so that goes beyond like the cycle is the stepping stone for that. Like it's helping women kind of break out of that mold of listening to, this is how we're supposed to work. This is how we're supposed to do it. This is how you should be doing. And it helps them learn to listen to what's happening for them and where their body's at and what that rhythm is. And oh, I do need a down day today, so I'm going to give myself that permission. So I think the cycle becomes like the stepping stone to that. And then it transitions and morphs into really helping women learn to trust themselves and like learn to trust what's happening for them and their own reality and their own intuition. And so then that transcends any of our experiences, right? So it doesn't matter if we're in a state of grief, if we're in a season of high intensity, it doesn't matter if we're in a season of pregnancy. It all comes back to that question of listening to like, what is true and right for me right now? And what do I need right now? What does my body need right now? And I think you even talked about like that cortisol cascade or like cortisol high. As I'm an occupational therapist. And so a big part of my professional practice is in the state of nervous system regulation and understanding how our nervous system's impacting us. And so I've said this like so many times, but like no other generation before has ever had to deal with the amount of sensory stimuli, the amount of sensation, the amount of stress, the amount of like fight or flight sort of spaces as any generation before. So our generation today is a vast need of learning how to regulate their nervous systems and learning how to bring back that cortisol level down. And a big part of that is learning and understanding like physiologically what is happening in the body, mentally what's happening in the mind, like what is happening for you in whatever season, wherever you're at, it doesn't matter. Like what is happening for you? Are we off the charts? If we're off the charts, like how do we bring it back down and be okay with that? When the messages maybe push harder, or when the messages may say, don't quit, or when the messages say you have to sacrifice everything in order to get to your goals, right? Like, how do we learn to listen to you despite what all the messages maybe around you are saying so that we can make sure that you are regulated, you're grounded, you're calm. And like that transcends any situation. It goes beyond just the hormones at that point.
Yeah. Nervous system regulation was something I defaulted and stumbled upon when I was 19 and teaching Pilates.
Yeah.
And it's like knowing how to downgrade into parasympathetic and then ramp up into sympathetic, and understanding that like when we say regulation, like regulation does not mean that one is bad or one is good. It's not a moralistic thing. It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
And so what are some techniques that you provide to allow for that regulation of the nervous system?
Well, so before, when I used to work at the Children's Hospital and worked with children and in the areas mostly of sensory integration and autism and ADHD and stuff like that. And we always talked about it like this just right zone. So we all have a threshold of either too much stimulation or too little stimulation. So as adults, like most of us are highly functioning adults. Like we know when we're in a low funk and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go get some coffee, right? Or we find ways, or if we're feeling way overstimulated, we take a bath and we calm ourselves down. So it's one, understanding and listening to where that just right zone is for you. And then, like you said, having a toolbox of stuff that's going to help you either when you've exceeded that threshold above and we're in that state of fight or flight and panic, like how do we bring it back down? And when we're in that low, like we're just not feeling like we have enough energy, what do we have to pull us back up? And so I think it really does become something that is very unique to each person to discover and kind of figure out like what those things are that are really going to be really grounding for you and which ones are going to be those ones that are energy boosters for you. I think there are some general principles like neurologically, a lot of like what we call like deep pressure or slow or bringing back to the body can be very grounding and kind of help us come down. Things that are a little bit more activating or like things that are, we in the OT world, we talk about like the vestibular. So like in the inner ear, like are we creating a lot of movement in the ear? Those tend to be very alerting and bringing things up. So we can pull in like very physiological ones. I find that one of the ones that I have been using so much for my clients is breath work. Breath work tends to have, I find like the ability to do both for a lot of people, and depending on where you're at and what you need. And so we can really customize the breathwork session to be able to bring you back to your body and help you really center and get calm and like really grounded in the body. And we can also use it as a way to really activate the body. And so that tends to be one that I use a lot. I go to like very body-based stuff. So it's like the breath work, getting outside in nature, like going for a walk. I mean, people vastly underestimate the value of like no headphones and just go outside and go for a walk, like what that can do for your nervous system, and that what that can do for your creativity, and what that can do for how you just show up. Like so many things there. I mean, the list could go on. Like I could go, like my sister introduced me to this like tea morning practice where it's like an ancient Japanese practice of tea and whatnot. And so I do that every morning, where it's this like stillness thing. Well, maybe not every morning, but a lot of mornings, where I'll like pour this tea and like sit and drink and just have this like meditative experience. And for me, that clears the mind and helps ground me and center me in such a different way than a lot of other things. So I think one, it's finding the things that work for you in your current life. Like in the past, there's no way I would have been able to get up for an hour before my kids are up and do this like tea ritual. In the season of life I'm in right now, that works. There was a season in the past where it was literally, as I get in the car, I just pause before I'm driving down the road and just take a couple big deep breaths or visualize grounding myself. So I think it is very specific for people based on what their nervous system needs. And also the season of life that you're in, and giving yourself the grace to lean into practices that work where you are, rather than having this expectation of, I have to have this whole 10-step nighttime routine that I see on Instagram, and that's what I need in order to make my body feel good. Like we don't always have to do that.
I completely agree. And thank you for bringing up the 10-step Instagram routine, because sometimes when you see those, especially because you and I are both moms, and I know that, you know, back in 2016, you were in a pretty harrowing position with 3 kids and a husband with a brain tumor.
Yeah.
So did you have these resources back then, or did you have to like build on it? Yeah.
Yeah, no, at that time, I really didn't. At the time, none of this was all like outside of my box. And I think it was probably maybe 6 months post having my daughter is when my sister introduced me to Beachbody, and I became a Beachbody coach, like wanting more of that freedom financially. And also, you know, post baby, like wanting to get healthy and fit. And that was the gateway for me in terms of personal growth and personal development and really taking care of my body. Like prior to that, I probably never would have been the person that would want to work out. Like I never would have done anything like that. And so it really became this journey of me of like learning to love and honor my body. And even recently, my daughter had her birthday and I had my 3rd baby at home, and I was reflecting on that experience with when her birthday came around and thinking through like even just the process of birth and like going through that whole experience for me of navigating through pregnancy and birth and then postpartum and all of that. I think that was probably the bigger catalyst of understanding our bodies in a much deeper way, and like became this catalyst for me of like really honoring the woman's body, like of that journey that we go on, and how the menstrual cycle plays out, and like how birth creates, and like how this magic happens. Like, I think that was kind of for me the beginning of it. And then it slowly started to grow after that. And at that time, really exercise was the only main tool that I was using. Like I and all the things I knew in my head, which I think is the other piece of it. Like we know these things in our heads sometimes. Like I knew it. That's what I did in my graduate degree. Like that's what I spent all my time doing, was helping people regulate their nervous system. But I wasn't necessarily embodying it and doing it for myself at home. It's like it was in a container of like, this is my work. This is what I do. I wasn't crossing that into how does this actually help me in my body, in my regulation? So I would come home and I would be with the hormones the way they were. Like I would hit that luteal phase and I'd become a raging lunatic and get so angry and so mad and like scream at my husband and like all those things, and like felt so out of body, out of control, and didn't know that it was hormones that were causing it. Didn't know that I was just totally deregulated, like so many pieces of it. But I think the hormones played such a big piece of it. At the time, I didn't know that that's what was happening. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Two things. One, you just painted for me this beautiful picture because of the pregnancy journey that I've, we know the cycles of a female cycles, and there's the 4 phases, and then there's the, then you menstruate. But that I suddenly saw like, oh, that 4th trimester that's called, after you give birth, that's really the kind of almost menstruation period of the down period versus that 2nd trimester where you get that like the creative like nesting, suddenly you have superpowers and can do so much. Yeah. Thank you so much for that breakthrough for me. And secondly, like, I think that you said something so powerful that is the knowledge of our cycles. And I just had the pleasure and honor of seeing Lisa Bilyeu speak on stage at Podcast Convention. Yeah. And she shared about how women between the ages of 40 and 55, studies show that that's the highest time that most women get divorced and that most women commit suicide because of their hormones shifting into menopausal years and perimenopause and menopause. And the fact that their brain is changing so much during that time. So when your clients come to you, what are the differences that you notice between the generations as far as like how they need to navigate their business, whether they're in their 40s and perimenopausal or menopausal, or in 30s and early 20s where that's birth and baby years, and then or younger. What are you noticing are the commonalities? And we're the women who are past menopause who have gone beyond that, and so now they've gotten through that. And so what are you noticing as to how each one of those types kind of needs to navigate their business in a different way?
Yeah. Well, I think even just like what you talked about, like with pregnancy and birth and that whole experience, it's very cyclical. And I have never really evaluated and looked at all of those phases, but they're likely, if I were to put it, there are all 4 of the phases of our cycle within that pregnancy experience. We have the same 4 phases within the year. So spring, summer, winter, fall, very much align. And I really firmly believe that each one of those 4 phases, each one of those 4 seasons gives us something biologically that's like a basic need. And that when we have those basic needs met is when we feel balanced, we feel whole, we feel complete, we feel in alignment with what we're doing. It's like we need all 4 of those phases. And without one of them is when we start to feel that imbalance, when we start to feel like something's off. And so same thing, when we look at that, it doesn't matter what season that you are in terms of your menstruation status, that we want to cultivate all 4 of those seasons. So I will put the caveat out. I have not worked with a lot of women who are postmenopausal or in that perimenopause phase. Some of them are like in the early stages of perimenopause, but I have a theory that if women in that phase start aligning with the moon and start using the moon as an external guide, that not only are they going to feel more balanced as they navigate through it, but I do kind of have this theory that it could help them transition hormonally easier because we're telling the body to continue with this normal, natural rhythm that we've been on. And even if the hormones are kind of a little off and they're doing their own thing and they're whatever that the hormones do during perimenopause, that if we're continuing with that consistent rhythm, it's like our body thrives on routine and it thrives on habits and it thrives on that rhythm. Like that was a whole part of my practice area as a therapist. Like that is all about helping people tap back into those rhythms, tap back into those habits. Like when somebody's had a stroke, I can help them relearn how to brush their teeth far faster if I know how they brush their teeth in the first place. Like I can remember the first time I was in the hospital and I was working with an older patient who'd had a stroke, and he took the tube of toothpaste and he stuck the tube of toothpaste to his mouth. And my immediate thought was, oh my gosh, like his cognition's off. He had the stroke. He doesn't know what he's doing. And he squeezed a little bit in his mouth and then he started brushing his teeth, right? for him, that's probably how he did it his entire life, was like squeezed toothpaste into his mouth. Instead, I put toothpaste on my toothbrush and then bring the toothbrush to my mouth. If I were to force him to try to put it on his toothbrush, he would not have been able to relearn that skill post having a stroke. And so we know so much about the way the brain works and how the brain functions is that when we help it stay within those rhythms and stay within those habits, it functions with more ease and it regains things. Like we've created those neural pathways, like continue with the neural pathway. So for me, that is I would love for women that are out there listening that are in that phase to try it. And it may take a while and come back to me with the research, like after you've done it, but going through like using the moon to navigate through that season, or same as like pregnancy. Like I've had women who have been using their cycle for months and months and months before they got pregnant and noticed the exact same 4 phases throughout their pregnancy with some variation, right? Like some days you're a little bit more tired than you maybe would have been, but they notice that same rhythm, even though the hormones are not the thing guiding that rhythm. So I think it really looks at this idea of like the hormones are definitely the basis of what I do. But a big part of it too is also creating these habits and these rhythms, and that habits and the rhythms impact the way our body functions and creates a little bit more of that stability. So when we look across the spectrum of the life, if we look at wherever you are menstruating status, is that as people, as human beings, if we're meeting all 4 of those core needs, so the menstruation phase hits the core need of rest and restoration and recharging. The follicular phase is the sense of like purpose and creation, like creating things out into the world. The ovulatory phase is our sense of relationship with other people and connection to other people. And then the final luteal phase is our relationship and connection to ourselves. And if we have all 4 of those pieces, I don't know, like I feel like we are so much more balanced. It's like, that's what we need. Like that's what makes humans feel balanced. And I think that spans wherever status you are in terms of your menstruation.
I completely agree. And I see the cycle, because we are natural beings. And when we try to disassociate ourselves from the natural realm, and it's very easy to, because I think one of the things I literally was having a conversation with my hairdresser the other day about just how it's very easy, especially for smart women, to get stuck in their heads and out of their bodies, especially if you've had trauma.
Yeah.
And being in your body can feel like an unsafe place to be.
Yeah.
And in that space, though, of finding that relationship to yourself, finding how you relate to others, and that creativity and that sense of purpose, and then allowing for the rest. And like, I know for me, I've definitely been guilty as the, hardcore high achiever who decides to start a business with every baby. Like, yes. The rest phase was something that I deeply deprived myself of. And that piece was so integral in my healing and necessary.
Yeah.
What piece of the cycle do you see most commonly women struggle with?
That one, like
the rest.
Yeah. A lot of, especially the women that I work with, because like you said, we're like highly ambitious. Like we want to go, we want to do, we want to create, we want to stay in that follicular phase all month long that feels like high on life. We're crushing all of our goals. We're getting the to-do list done. We're like moving and grooving and getting things moving. Like we want to stay in that phase. And so we push and we strive to try to stay in that phase as much as possible, that rest and taking space back. And I see it. I mean, I'm in some groups of entrepreneurs and I sometimes will just listen. It is that is the hardest part for entrepreneurs. And they talk about like I hear people saying like the rest is productive. And shoot, there was like another big phrase that is in that vein of like, when we are in that rest space, that is our visionary. Like you and I talked about that a little bit at the beginning. Like that is our visionary space. That is our CEO space. When we're stuck in the doing and the going, we're not able to be in that visionary CEO space. And yet so many entrepreneurs, especially because a lot of them either are solopreneurs or started as a solopreneur. And in that solopreneur space, you are doing a lot of the work. You're like moving things off the ground. And at some point, we got to let go of those things and stay more in that visionary space. And like that is where we want to be. That is the the wrestle of like going from hustling and grinding to get our businesses up off the ground to transitioning into allowing ourselves to rest. And even I could put on there that like those solopreneurs that are hustling and grinding, they need it the most in that phase even. Mm-hmm. But that is, I think, the hardest part. Like that's one of the hardest phases for women or for people to really embrace, especially if they've got big goals and big dreams. It's like we've been conditioned for so long to make sacrifices and to work hard. Like even, I know I said like early, I started with Beachbody and I still use their workouts. And I was listening to one the other day and she was referring to Tony Robbins. And I don't know if this is true, but she was talking about like Tony Robbins was talking about that in order to live an extraordinary life, you have to do things like beyond extraordinary. Like you have to do the things that nobody else is willing to do. Like A+ players don't get like the extraordinary life. It's the ones that go above the A+ play, right? And so she was talking about this idea of just pushing and success and like this achievement ranking. And I left that workout like listening to her and I was like, well, what if actually not doing that? Like, what if not striving and pushing was the most extraordinary thing you could do? Because most of what society is telling us is to achieve the biggest job, to have the biggest bank account, to buy the biggest house, to have the fittest body, like all of those things that to go counterculture to that is the most extraordinary thing you can do. So understanding what matters to you and what are those goals you want to achieve, and leaning into that and not listening to anybody else, not listening to what everybody else calls success or what anybody else thinks is extraordinary, but finding that extraordinary thing for you. And I think we're seeing it a lot more, at least I am. My social media feed is full of these women who have taken this like simple life approach and created farms and homesteads and just like unsubscribed from that whole success ladder. And I think that is the most extraordinary life. Like that is still incredibly extraordinary to like say, tap out. I'm not doing this like hustle and grind sort of thing. I don't know where I was going with this whole conversation or where we started with it, but I think it is kind of unraveling and unlearning some of those messages that we've been taught that we have to do or perform a certain way in order to be successful or any of those types of things. Oh, I remember where we were like, which phase? So that's the hardest one is the rest for sure. Mm-hmm. I do find that a lot of women across the board really struggle with the luteal phase because of all the emotion that comes up in that phase. Mm-hmm. It can be really challenging. It can be a lot of limiting beliefs and fears and doubts and wonderings if I'm good enough, am I able enough and capable? So it can be a really heavy phase for an emotional self-doubt phase. And I think that phase can be one of the other ones that a lot of women notice the most. They struggle the most in terms of like, it comes on them whether they want it to or not. Whereas the rest phase, they can just skip the rest phase if they want, right? Like they can just move along past it. But this one comes and they really can't just skip over it. Like it happens regardless. So
I found the luteal phase requires me to rest because of how big the emotions are. And then once I started honoring the bigness of the emotions, that they'd just been built up. They were kind of like a Jenga set and like they just kind of needed to be toppled. And then once I started honoring that and letting it be what it is, and also knowing, like my family knows, like 9 days out from the menstruation cycle, mommy is just a little bit more on edge. Mm-hmm. And that ability to be present with what is, was a game changer for my relationships and also mainly because like you said, that luteal phase is the relationship to self of like really being able to say, wow, this is the phase that every single self-doubt that I have seems to rear its head. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is my time to actually process that before I go into the resting phase. Mm-hmm. And I think that to your point about the Beachbody workout experience, I think that women do discipline differently.
Yeah.
A lot of advice out there, especially in the personal development realm, is like, being disciplined and you have your workout every day and you do the thing. And I'm fine with that. But sometimes the workout needs to be different depending upon where you are in your cycle. For sure. I know that, during my ovulation time, I'm not doing a lot of like low transverse abdominis work with Pilates because my ovaries are like, hey,
we're here.
And so that awareness of the body and like what she really needs versus this fitting yourself into this box that is man-made.
Yeah.
That doesn't actually fit the female form.
Yeah. Yeah. And I used to like harp on the word consistency a lot because I think that idea of being consistent all the time is really what holds a lot of women back, because we feel like we have to show up the same way and we have to do the same thing over and over again, especially when we think about like in the workout space, right? If we want to get results, we have to be consistent. Well, consistent looks like showing up and doing the same, like not the same workout, but like same style of workout, like every single day. But women's bodies are very different. And there really has not been a lot of research. I think even I was writing something the other day. It was like 1980. 1980 was the first that it was recommended that women be included in medical studies. 1980. That's not that long ago. And even at that point, I think a lot of the women that were being included in studies were women that were on birth control. And birth control is very different on our bodies. Like it doesn't have the same sort of status. So I think we're going to start to see a bigger trend going forward of like, what does exercise look like? What does nutrition look like? What does sleep? Like I've even seen that recently. Like I want to find the study, but I've seen a lot of social media posts, people saying that like women actually don't need 7 to 8 hours of sleep. Like the general old recommendations, that women actually need 9 to 10 hours of sleep. And so I'm like, I want to find the study on that. But even with that, like when we look at sleep and nutrition and food and all of these like basic bodily functions, what has been coined as the standard or the normal or the recommended didn't necessarily account for how a woman's body changes. And so I have like wanted to get rid of the word consistent. And yet at the same time, like we do have to show up in our business consistently. Like we do have, it just isn't consistent every single day. And so somewhere recently I had seen someone use the word devoted. And I really like that word, especially for women, like, because I know like you and I are probably both the same. We are so devoted to our businesses. Like we want to see that business grow. We want to show up for our families and our businesses and our people and our community. Like we're devoted to showing up for them. But that devotion doesn't necessarily mean that it's consistent every day. And I really like that because it gives me the freedom, and I think gives people the freedom to feel like I can be devoted to my business and that it's going to move and I'm going to move it. I'm going to do the things that need to do to move it forward. But that may look like me taking a week off. That may look like me taking a break. That may look like I'm not posting on social media every day. Like whatever that looks like, creating that, what does devotion look like for you and your business? And how can you be devoted to your business and the growth it has in the family, or for your family and for your community and your people, without that feeling of like, I have to do the same thing every single day, like consistency feel.
I love that you and I have different definitions for consistency, because I think this is something so powerful in the words that we use. Like I truly deeply believe in devotion. I also believe in consistency, but I think the consistency, from what I'm hearing from you, is more of repetition. Yeah. Versus, because a cycle, our female cycles are consistent.
Exactly.
Like, that's consistent. We have every single four phases. Nature is consistent in having every single one of the cycles, but we're not in summer 24/7.
Yes.
365 days a year. We have those consistent cycles. So I think cycles are consistent.
Yeah.
But repetition.
Yeah.
We are not built to experience the same thing every single day. And one of the biggest changes for me in my business was when I took my giant list of consistency things that I was like, I'm going to do, these are our discipline things that I'm going to do, and tick them off my box. And I dialed it back to like bare ass minimum. Like, what are the few things that I can be really, really devoted to, and that I know that deeply support me? So like a meditation in the middle of the day while I'm putting my son down for his nap, non-negotiable. A good workout, taking my vitamins 3 times a day, like those basic things. And then for business, the same thing. Instead of having 14,000 bajillion things to do, which as business owners can happen, like there's always something else that you can do. There's always. But looking at like what really moves the needle, what is that 5% that moves the 95%? And those few actions to do, just Do those.
Yeah.
And what if you just surrendered the rest of the day and just did that 5% that moved 95%?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that like you talked about, like I kind of, I've steered away from really talking about the consistency because it is like, I think it was for me a buzzword, and then I got an action. But I also found that I got a lot of people that didn't want to put in the work when they hear the word consistency. So I think the wrestle with consistency, and when we think about it, is like, if you're in the place of like, I don't want to show up consistently because I don't want to do the work and it's resistant and I'm trying to avoid something, or I'm avoid the discipline, or I'm avoiding whatever, that's a whole different ball game and a whole different conversation and topic, right? Of like how we move into this place of being committed to what we're doing and showing up. And like you said, it is still cycles. It's still the rhythm. In fact, if we look at like the rhythms of Mother Nature, it's more consistent than anything else. Like the way the moon operates and the sun operates, like the sun comes up every day and the moon comes up every day. Like it's this, those are the most consistent things in our world. And yet they're not the same all the time. Like, and so even that, like I look at the dichotomy of like the sun and the moon, right? The sun functions way more like men do in this 24-hour rhythm, and the moon is more in the 28-day rhythm of women. And so there is both rhythms. And I think that that's a beautiful way to look at it too, in terms of like masculine and feminine, is that there's no right or wrong. They both coexist and we need them both. Like we couldn't, I mean, yesterday we did without the sun for a bleep of a minute, like it's like during the eclipse, but like otherwise we need both, and they both coexist, and that they balance each other out. Like the sun's up during the day and the moon's out during the night, and vice versa. Like there's no right, wrong, bad, the other. Like, and so it's looking at how does that rhythm look for you, and how can you be in that state of commitment, and how can you be in that cycle that works for you, right? And how does it align with how your body's feeling and how your intuition is guiding, and create some consistency within that flow of what women really feel, I think is a good way to put it.
Have you noticed that at any point in the cycle, intuition is heightened in women?
A lot of people believe that the menstrual phase is your highest subconscious intuitive sort of time. So it is the time I highly recommend all of my clients take off social media, at least for a couple of days, and get off of like all platforms. Just go outside, be in nature, be with it's like it is your visionary space or time of the month. So whatever you can do in that time to create spaciousness, to allow those intuitive ideas to come in. I often talks about like this your $1 million idea time, when a lot of women don't look at their periods as that really great, wonderful time of the month. When we start to transition it into this space of like, that's when your $1 million ideas come in. That's when your most intuitive things come in. But you have to create the space to allow that to happen. So a lot of women just going through life and going through the day and just hustling to the next thing are missing out on those really intuitive things because they're not listening to them. So it really does require that intentionality to create the space to hear it.
Yeah. And yes, I'm reflecting on just the past few months of my cycles, and those have been some like pretty awesome, like breakthrough moments in those first few days of menstruation. Like it really, like the last time it was when I was in LA. And suddenly I had this like awakening to a whole different type of clientele for our podcast agency, and had like 3 offers and contracts on the table because of the space that I had given myself and that experience to allow yourself to be in that space.
Yeah.
Have you noticed depending upon whether a woman's cycle falls with the moon cycle, whether it's a full moon or a new moon menstruation, that their intuitive capabilities are different?
So you will hear people say that women, and I think historically we probably all did function with the moon. So the new moon would be your bleed time, and the ovulation phase would be the ovulation would be the full moon. And I do think that prior to having artificial lighting, that is likely how women's bodies normally, we all probably functioned in that way. Once the introduction of artificial lighting came in, it started to impact our circadian rhythms, and the circadian rhythm has a really direct relationship to our infradian rhythm, which is our menstrual cycle. So I think there's a lot of mix there, but I do think biologically we were probably built to kind of operate on that moon cycle. I actually had a client one time be like, that makes so much sense. Like if you think about it, back in the day when they didn't have artificial light, the only time that they probably could like have intercourse and sex and whatnot, and make babies was when there was a full moon out and they could see each other. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, but it kind of makes sense, right? Like make babies when the moon is out. So I think that normally and historically, that's probably how we were designed to operate. I do know that there are some things I've read where women that bleed on the new moon are more inclined intuitively in some ways, or if you're on the full moon, that it's different and things like that. I think that there may be some element to that for people who are really aligned and like really in tune with their body and really in tune with energetics. I think for a lot of women, they probably don't notice that, and that there probably isn't something there. So I really think, and everybody, like my cycle is 32 days. And so there are times when I do match up with the moon and sometimes I don't. And so do I take advantage of it when it lines up that way? I'm like, yes, I'm going to like go all in on these, like, and make this a really powerful cycle. And other times it's not. So I don't know if that really answered your question, but I think for some women, they maybe feel it. But I think the consistency of it being on the cycle for most women is probably very hard. I think most people have closer to that 30-day cycle than a 28-day cycle. And so even just a 30-day cycle isn't going to match up
every time.
Like it's going to have variation to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that was something, because I used to have a 35-day cycle. Now I'm at a 30-day post 2 babies. And it's allowing for that variance. And I think when we apply the strategy of our menstrual cycle into our business, what do you recommend is the pattern for the flow of each of those 4 phases?
Like I said, that menstrual phase is the time for you to be really like planning things out, being visionary, like thinking of what's coming in the month, kind of setting those intentions, setting those goals, getting the ideas out there. Then you move into that follicular phase. I oftentimes call it the accelerate phase because it is about like taking big momentum and taking big action. It's when estrogen starts to climb, and estrogen has a lot of that more testosterone-y type feel, and where we're like, I want to take things on. I'm good. Let's go. Let's get things rolling. Let's put those ideas into practice. Like, let's take big action on them. And then we get to the top of that height of estrogen is when we ovulate. And so at that point, our bodies are biologically trying to make a baby. And so you're very magnetic. There's studies that have shown like even your skin changes, your saliva changes, your smell changes, like biologically you're signaling to the world to make a baby with you. And so you can be very magnetic, very radiant. You communicate more articulately. So it's a great time for podcast interviews or going live or launching or anything, creating social media posts, like anything that requires you to be on camera and talk to camera. Great time. You'll likely be able to get 7, 8, 10 reels done in a quick little shorter period of time versus if we do it in that next luteal phase, you might record it like 50 bajillion times and still not like it and then never end up posting it because you don't like the way you looked and how it felt and like all those things. So this is a really great time to go hardcore on anything that requires your visual presence because you are going to feel it, like you're resonating with the people you're connecting with. And then once that estrogen dips down, progesterone picks up, and progesterone feels very different. For some women, it can be very productive feeling, but it's a totally different type of productivity. It's not like, I'm going to get things going, I'm going to get things moving, I'm going to get big things off the ground. It's I'm going to clean out my entire closet. I'm going to go through my entire email inbox. I'm going to crunch all my numbers. I'm going to do very behind the scenes type of work and very productive in that way. Because of all of those emotions and all those feels, it can also be a really powerful time for you to write. So writing sales copy, writing emails, writing social media content, like writing anything requires you to connect with your people and understand them in a very empathetic way and like heart to heart feeling sort of piece. But you don't want to show up on camera and talk it, but you're like, I could be in my yoga pants and sweaty bun and just be behind my computer and creating a magical content. So I think it's a variation of looking at what are the tasks that you have in your business, like what are you doing, and then matching up with each one of those different phases where those tasks will fall. Some of them can fall into both, right? There's going to be things that maybe you could do it in your luteal phase, or you could do it in your accelerate phase, like, or that follicular phase. Like it could go either one. So then that really becomes this magic of looking at how much is on my plate, where's the best place to put things. Like it's not a cut and dry, very masculine way to approach it. It can become very dynamic and like, okay, well, I have a very heavy case, like launching for say. When you launch, like if it's the first time you've launched something, there's a lot of writing. You might be writing a sales.
There's a lot of content,
and there's, checkout pages and like all the thing like there. So that luteal phase may be a very, very heavy writing phase that some of those other luteal phase tasks, like your budget or your numbers or any of that kind of stuff, that might not fall in that phase that month. That one might have to go in the accelerate phase that month, right? So there is some flux and some change and there's some variability that when we look at really all the things that we do in the business, we can shift and change them. The other thing I will put out there, just while we're on this little topic, is that this should feel empowering. This should feel motivating. This should feel exciting and not a limiting factor. Women can do anything they want to do in any phase of their cycle. It doesn't matter. Like I can show up. I've shown up and done so many podcast interviews when I'm smack dab in the middle of my menstrual cycle, like, or menstrual phase. Like it doesn't matter. Like you can do it. You can do it in any phase. It just may be different. You might not have the same energy. You might have to, like, going back to that nervous system regulation. Like if you did it in your menstrual phase, you might need a bubble bath and like only 1 or 2 things on your calendar for the entire day. But in that height of your ovulation phase, you might be able to do 12 podcasts back to back to back, right? So it's like understanding that you as a woman can do anything, any phase of the month, anytime that you want to do it. You just might be more aligned to do it at different times of the month. And so rather than looking at this as like, okay, well, I can't change everything. I can't move everything. Don't worry about that. Like change the few things that you can change, right? Like you and I both have kids. I have 3 kids. Today after school, I have 3 school pickups. I have swim. I have baseball. Like I have back to back to back, right? Like after school, that doesn't change. Like I can't be like, oh, it's my menstrual phase. I can't pick up my kids from school and drive them to swim and baseball and all over the place because I'm tired. Like it doesn't happen. Like that can't shift. So the question then becomes, what can you shift? What can you lean into? How can you lean into your cycle? Not like I have to reinvent and do everything over again. And like how this isn't going to be possible. I hear that from women all the time. It's not possible for me. I work a 9 to 5. It's not possible for me because of this or that. And it's like, okay, I get that. Like some things may not be able to change, but what can you change? Maybe it looks like just looking at your workouts. Maybe it looks like your nutrition. Maybe it looks like giving yourself permission to go to bed earlier and like wake up a little bit later. Maybe you skip your morning routine and allow yourself to have that extra recuperation. I don't know. But what can you do? And when we start asking that question of like, what can I do? It changes the lens and the results in which we get.
Completely agree. And I love how you framed it, Renae, so that it's not that this is a limiting piece. Like I see a lot of women, particularly because there is so much information out there, which is wonderful, from cycles to human design, to your astrological charts, to like all to nervous system regulation, to, thinking that there's all these things that you quote unquote have to do and have to follow. And honestly, those are all like they're still putting it out of you, even if it's in you, even if it's the body, like it's thinking that there's a have to is putting that outside of yourself, which prevents from the very core of what this is all about, which is trusting yourself.
Exactly.
And I have seen with people who are leveraging and using human design in their business, like I'm a projector and my friend Tirza Shirai, she's a reflector. She built a $30 million company. But I've seen people on the flip side say, oh, well, I'm a reflector, so it takes 28 days for me to make a decision. I'm like, not so. Like, let's not use these things as an excuse. Like, just because, it just because your next launch is coming up and it just happens to be, oops, you scheduled it during your menstruation cycle, still continue with doing it and measure the results. Allow yourself that curiosity to explore. But I think when we're beholden to all of these shoulds, then it diffuses us of our power. And what this is supposed to do, what our body and honoring our body is really supposed to be about, it's about learning to remember to trust the natural gift of this beautiful meat sack that we've been given for this lifetime, to be able to say like, okay, there's a natural rhythm to this space as to how I need to move. How do I keep going with this?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that like you said, coming back to it, it's all about learning to trust yourself and learning what you need, because every single one of us is going to need something different. We're not all the same, right? Like when we look at food and nutrition, like you or I are going to function very differently. Some people thrive on a vegan diet. Some people thrive on a carnivore diet. So how can you say that there's one right way or one right thing for everybody? And there really isn't. And so when we start to look at all of the different remedies and all the different things out there, all the different tools that are, like you said, they're like, say, this is what you need to be doing. This is how you should be doing it. It defeats the whole thing. Like really at the ultimate, it should come back to like, how do I learn to trust myself? Like, how do I learn to listen to that intuition and use all of that stuff as information and education, because we are not going to always know like, hey, cherry juice helps people sleep at night, or magnesium helps you with your menstrual cycle, or like we may not have that information. So use the information to then discern what is it that I need, what's going to work for me, which of those things am I going to put in my toolbox, in my tool belt and use and utilize, and which ones am I going to let go of.
Yeah, and I think the only time is when we can do that is when we actually have the space to get still.
Yeah.
Like it requires that built-in rest period or stillness or, space away from social media and all of the noise to say, okay, I received this noise. Like what resonates within my body? What actually feels good in the space that it feels forward moving?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Totally.
Love it. Yeah. So since you are a mom of 3 and are, we can't put mom life on hold, even, despite cycles and things like that. Have you applied your cycle strategy to your parenting as far as how you engage with your children?
I would say that like the biggest thing in terms of my kids is for me understanding where I'm at and when I need a break and when I need that space. So there's been plenty of times where I'll tell my husband, like, I need to check out right now. Like, can you do bedtime? Can I go take a bath? I'm going to go for a walk. Like, you take care of this. So I think some of those moments of communication have been really helpful. I think even for me, I have gotten really good about turning off music in the car, because even just stimulation, like hyperstimulation, and then also understanding the impact that noise and vibration and frequency, like all that kind of has on us and stuff, that I've gotten really good about riding in the car with no music and no nothing, and just using those micro moments to be able to allow myself to reconnect with myself. So I think it's making those small shifts and changes that have made the biggest difference for me. But I think one, it's the communication. And I've even had those communication with the kids. I'm like, Mom is on edge. I'm needing a little bit of space. Like, please don't ask me for anything right now. Like, just give me 10 minutes. Like, I'm going to go outside. I'm going to do this thing. Like, let me just be 10 minutes, And my kids are older now. My oldest is almost 13. So they have that awareness and recognition, which I think is also a really beautiful thing to model to our kids, that mom still needs some time away and mom needs like a break and things like that. I think it's also been, for me, I've done a lot of trips. Like, I was just gone last month for 10 days in Sedona, and I'm leaving next couple weeks for another big trip, like speaking and doing different things. But I think they see that as like, mom needs these breaks too. And I think that that's a really valuable skill to teach our kids and model to our kids, that mom is not the same all the time, and that it's okay to take breaks, and it's okay to have moments where we are not able to handle, and we don't want to have fun all the time. Like, sometimes mom doesn't want to go play. Mom wants to just stay here, like, and that's okay too. So I think, but it all comes back to communication I mean, ultimately, it's like having that awareness, like being able to communicate that to your kids or your spouse or your partner or whoever, like that this is where I'm at, this is what I'm needing, and this is how you can help support that. And that's how we'll all function a little bit better.
So true. I mean, it brings me back to a couple weeks ago. I just had this like emotional moment, and I literally had 3 minutes before I had to get my boys out the door, but I went into the bedroom and I shut the door and I just allowed myself to cry. And my little 6-year-old son shows up and is like, he knocks on the door. He's like, "Mommy, we have 2 minutes. Are you okay?" And I'm just like, and we just have this word, this phrase in our house, like, "Mommy is processing," or anyone, like, "I'm processing. I'm just allowing myself to be in this.
Yeah.
Let me feel it, and then I will be fine." And that was exactly the case of what went down. I just had to allow myself to fully feel that feeling, and then it processed, and then I just stepped out with my son, and all was well. And of course, it was in the luteal phase, like the day before menstruation. So like those big feelings, but and my boys, because I'm raising 2 boys, having them have an awareness of mommy's cycle too. Like they are super aware. They know what a period is. They know what menstruation is. Like they're like, at first my son was horrified. He was like, "Oh my God, yeah." And then I was like, "No, this is normal. This is what allows mommy to have more babies. Like this is a good thing. Like it's part of the female body." So it's normalizing a conversation around the cycle, which I'm so glad we got to have you on the show, because I think it's so vital to make these things that have been like taboo and like you're not supposed to talk about it in like secret women's groups. I'm like, no, let's bring this out to the forefront so that it's the knowledge, so that kids like, oh my God, if I had had this knowledge when I was 16 years old and bulimic and struggling and, trying all the things and my hormones were out of control, I would have just had so much more agency over my life, my emotions, and wouldn't have been as self-destructive as I was as a teenager.
For sure.
I think it's so necessary that, and I love that you are just paving the way for this conversation to open up in so many different avenues.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like I could go in a whole, like, that would be a whole nother conversation of like what we could do for the next generation by having this conversation about women of our generation healing and then being able to make and pave that way for the next generation. And like, as somebody who has 2 girls and a son, and watching like as that navigation into middle school and things like that has been happening, like how important and valuable it is for girls to understand that this is hormones and not an identity thing. And having that separation between like hormones and identity of like, the world is ending, I have no friends, and life sucks and life is miserable. Like, and understanding, and for them to know like, hey, this is a part of the cycle and where I'm at, and having that recognition, I think could change the trajectory for so many girls in that next generation going forward.
And for the mental health crisis that we're facing like right now, especially with girls, I completely agree and am on board. And whatever movement you start, I am on board with that. Let me know.
Okay.
I would love to pivot into some rapid fire to wrap this up. You down?
Sure.
Okay. Who is your favorite female character in a book or a movie, and why?
The first one that came to mind, I'm just going to go with it, is Merida from Brave. I don't love that movie and love all the story, like part of it, but I do love her independence and drive, and also the willingness to concede and like create relationship and connection again at the end, like to put some of her things on the line to create that relationship. So I'm going to go with that one.
What woman, alive or alive in her time, would you want to trade places with just for a day to be in her body, see how she thought, experience the world through her eyes?
Same one. The one that comes to mind is Oprah. Like I would love to, I don't know, just to see what that reality looks like for her, of like the journey that she's been on, and to see the things that she has been able to experience and do. Like, I think that's really powerful.
What is her morning routine to set you up for success? You mentioned tea.
It does. It does vary. I would say in my luteal phase, I actually let myself sleep in quite a bit, and I get up like rushed out the door pretty much because I let myself sleep extra. But I do, if I have time and space, I will do this whole like tea ritual in the morning, but it usually takes like 45 minutes to an hour. So I have to allow for that. If like this morning, I did not have that time. So I made my little mushroom coffee and just sat for like 10 minutes. But for me, I've always said like morning routines can vary based on where you're at in your cycle. And so my morning routine does fluctuate and flow, but I am finding a lot of value in that stillness first thing in the morning for sure.
Same.
Yeah.
What is your evening routine to set you up for successful mornings?
Lately, I've really been focusing on a gratitude journal, but my gratitude journal is like embedded in as like a manifestation journal. So it's like setting the gratitude for like things that already currently are like my reality. And then also being very grateful for the things I'm wanting to manifest. So I kind of like blend that experience together. And then I usually will read a book. Normally, I use it as my like leisure, play, fun book. And honestly, I will admit that I've been reading some very like sensual books that I feel like that's a part of our femininity that a lot of women have been turned off. So I've been there, but lately I've been reading some more personal development books in the evening and really enjoying that. So either way, I read in the evening.
Same. What do you define to be your queendom?
I feel like if I like is truly coming back to that place of like truly accepting and owning who you are, what you are, and being okay with that. And I like for me, what came to mind even too is like lately I've been really feeling this urge to like garden and be outside and like create this space and just allow ourselves to be present in the spaces that we have and where we are. I think that is really what creates that queendom type feel versus that we can always be driving and striving for something else. But when we're always looking to the grass is greener on the other side, we lose the experience of where we're at right now. And I think that is where we really resonate. And that's where we create that coherence. So I think it comes back to embracing and embodying our current reality and being okay in that presence and also on a journey to bigger and bigger things too. Like that duality of like holding both of those things at the same time. I don't know if that was a really great answer, but
it's perfect. I think I love living in the duality and the paradox and the yes and of it all. Like, yes, you can be disciplined and you can discipline your rest. Like, yes, you can have consistency and it doesn't have to be the same.
Yeah.
So that paradox.
Yeah.
Lastly, how do you crown yourself?
I thought about this the other night when I got out of the hot tub or something and I did some like dry brushing. And dry brushing has been something that I like waffled with over time. But as I did it and I was like, oh my gosh, my skin is like dry and crusty and falling all over the place. It was like super gross. But it was in that moment that I was like, taking care of my body is that thing. Like I find that in the past, I very much felt like taking care of my skin or doing my hair or wearing makeup or like any of those things was frivolous. Like it was above what I needed to do. And as I've gotten older, I've realized like how much taking care of my body and taking care of me, from putting lotion on to putting lipstick on to curling my hair or like taking care of my hair, how much that makes me just feel like I value myself and I value my body. It's not a what I look like thing. It's not a what anybody else thinks of me. It's truly a like me, not self-confidence. I wouldn't even say that. It really feels like a value thing. Like I value, in order for me to put lotion on and to paint my nails or to do my makeup, like that's me honoring my body. That's me valuing my body and making sure like I feel good and I resonate with the frequency of what I want to project into the world is this person that values herself and loves her body and takes care of herself and like all these things. And so for me, anytime I practice any of those things, like whether it's painting my nails or putting on my makeup, I feel like that embodiment of that, like I value myself enough to do that. Whereas in the past, it would have been like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, I don't really care. Like, these are all frivolous things. But it's now become like, this is my part of me, like loving me, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I so deeply love and resonate with that desire and that demonstration to the world of how deeply you are valuing yourself. Like I have my warrior paint ritual with my makeup, and like I'm like, this is like my time to, it's not for anybody else. It's just for me. And so I so honor that you value that and that you found the value in doing that for yourself.
Yeah.
Renae, where do we find you? How do we work with you?
Yes. If you go to Instagram, it's Renae Fieck. So my first and last name, it's weird spelling. So I'm sure you'll have it looked at or picked up. Same website, reneefieck.com. Those are my favorite two places. If you are a podcast listener and love listening to podcasts, it would be the Cycle Advantage podcast are the greatest places.
Renae, thank you so much for coming on the Crown Yourself podcast. It has been a pleasure getting to know you and to learn from you. As always, my fellow sovereigns, own your throne, mind your business, because your reign is now.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If what you heard resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and start creating a bigger impact now by sharing this with a friend. Just by doing that one simple act of kindness, you are creating a royal ripple to support more people in their sovereignty. And if you're not already following on social media, connect with me everywhere at crownyourself.now for more inspiration. I am so excited to connect with you in the next episode. And in the meantime, go out there and create a body, business, and life that rules. Because today, you crown yourself.